Dear friends, today we have with us a very special guest. Today we have with us Dr. Subhash Kak, who needs no introduction. He is a well renowned computer scientist in America. But more than that, he's also a prolific scholar in Indian history and Hindu philosophy. And he has written his latest book, The Idea of India, Bharat as a Civilization. Dr. Subhash Kak, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Pallavi. Glad to be on your show. And here is a copy of the book, if you want to see it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kak.
Sure.
Let's begin with the book. Tell us a bit more about this latest book that you've written.
Well, the background to this book is that for many years, starting from the 90s, I've been working on the history of Indian science. And what I've discovered is so counter to the stuff that students get to read in school and college curriculum that I thought I should put it all together someplace. And at the same time, it also goes counter to the colonial view of India that India, upon its independence, embraced. And the colonial view was that India is basically a hierarchical society where caste is a very big factor. And then India doesn't have any science. And therefore, the British were needed in India to really bring modern ideas of enlightenment and science in some sense to civilize India. Now, not only is this wrong, the other views also which went along with it, such as India is a passive civilization. India has always received things from outside, innovations from outside, sciences from the Greeks. And the people from Europe, even the Vedas from Europe, these were Aryans who came from Europe and brought their Vedas, so they really belong to Europe. These are such ridiculous theories that in one form or the other, they became a part of the received wisdom. And since all the recent scholarship of the past 40, 50 years and longer goes totally counter to it, and there is a very coherent new story that has emerged. So that's what this book is all about.
Dr. Kak, tell us, you've written a lot of books on the subject. What made you write this one at this point of time?
Yeah, I've written a lot of books on India. For example, in the 90s, I wrote a book called The Astronomical Code of the Ṛgveda, which was the discovery of a long forgotten astronomy of the Vedic times. And that was also important in many ways because what that showed was that the astronomical references in the Vedic books should not be ignored. If they had astronomy, you can't just dismiss them, which is what had been done before. And then I wrote another book called The Gods Within, that the devatas that we have in our tradition also live within us, because there is a principle in the Indian tradition, which is called Yat Pinde Tad Brahmande. As in the cell, so in the cosmos, that there is a mirroring of the outer cosmos within the body or within the brain or within the mind, and which is the reason why we are able to make sense of the world, because you could always ask the question, here we are, a speck of dust, namely us, our bodies, on a speck of dust. Earth itself is like a speck of dust in this vast, vast universe. Then how is it that man has been able to, man and woman both, they have been able to do whatever they have by way of knowledge? So all of this information had slowly gotten together, and I thought 2-3 years ago that it had reached a size that it was fit enough to be put into a book. So this is how the book came to be written.
Dr. Kak, Could you give us a few insights into the book? Because I was reading its description, and it talks about India's scientific contributions in the ancient world, a lot of which is largely unknown to the general public. I mean, a few are known, but I think people really do not have any understanding of the depth of it, the depth of the influence of Indian sciences, not just Hindu philosophy, so to speak.
Oh, absolutely. 7 years ago, I translated the Vaisheshika Sutras, which is the most ancient physics from India, which is about 500 BCE. And for some strange reason, no scientist had looked at it. It had been looked at by some philosophers, but then philosophers have their own perspective. They're looking at words and meanings and so on. So there was no comprehensive picture. So when I translated it, I was absolutely stunned. For example, 2 of the 3 Newton's laws of motion are there. And in fact, one of them is in exactly the same form. The third law of motion of Newton's is to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So in Vaisheshika Sutras, the corresponding sutra is Karya Virodhi Karma. Karya meaning action is equally opposed by reaction. So this is one. And in the sutras, Vaisheshika Sutras also, there is a very modern way of looking at physical reality. What the sutras say is that everything there is to know about the physical universe can be obtained from the properties of substances and their motions. And that is something that no scientist will quarrel with. In fact, that is the very basis of modern science as well. And there's also the idea that how we obtain knowledge of the outer reality is through our senses. And some of what we receive is particular or Vishesha, from where the word Vaisheshika comes. Some of it is universal. In Sanskrit, that is Samanya. And the third element of this triangle, or third corner of this triangle, is called Samavaya, that the way the mind interacts with the outside system leads to a collapse of all the different possibilities that exist. So in other words, the mind creates its reality. And this principle and another principle called from the Upanishadic Mahavakya. Mahavakya means great statement, which is I am Atma Brahma, that this Atman is equivalent to the entire cosmos. It's a very famous Mahavakya. These two were instrumental in the creation of the deepest theory of physics there is, which was created 100 years ago. It's called quantum mechanics. And the founder of quantum mechanics was a Austrian Vedantin named Erwin Schrödinger. So without quantum mechanics, you cannot have chemistry. Without chemistry, you cannot have biology or brain science or integrated circuits or computers. So Indian sciences, not only in this, now this is of course an indirect influence, but directly, the scientific revolution itself occurred 300 years ago. Newton's invention of the infinite series and calculus, Newton and Leibniz. But now we know that 300 years prior to that in Kerala, all this had been done, and this is celebrated all over the world now. It's called the Kerala School of Mathematics and Astronomy. And there are some who speculate that the Jesuits who were in South India at that time took this with them to Europe, and it took Europe a couple of 100 years to digest it, just as it took Europe a couple of 100 years to digest the Indian number system, which are called the Arabic numerals. They're really the Indian numerals. They went via the Arabs to Europe about 1,000 years ago, but it took 200 years for Europe to accept it, because the church leaders said this is not acceptable. Negative numbers are satanic, and because the Indian number system admits or accepts negative numbers, so there was a lot of resistance. It took a long time for Europe to accept it. So these are just two random examples. A third interesting example that your viewers would like is that in 1898, the famous French actress of her times, Sarah Bernhardt, with her troupe was visiting the US, and she was in New York, and she arranged for Nikola Tesla, after whom the Tesla car is named, but he was the foremost engineer of his time in London, in New York, and he was a Serbian. So she arranged for Tesla and Vivekananda to meet at a dinner, and each one of them wrote about what happened in the meeting. And so we know what happened. So there, Vivekananda told Tesla that, look, according to Indian physics, it is possible to convert matter into energy. See, it was not a part of Western science because matter into energy equation E equal to mc squared was done only in 1905, a few years after this meeting. And now people speculate that since Tesla was the most famous Serbian and Einstein's first wife was a Serbian, that it's possible that this idea may have been given to Elena, I think her name was, by Tesla. But whether that is true or not, these are many of, or some of the many examples of the influence of Indian sciences, not just ancient sciences, even contemporary sciences, which have created this modern world as we know it. One more example, Mendeleev's periodic table. Mendeleev himself was inspired by this Sanskrit Varnamala, which is a two-dimensional, e, k, k, g, g, etc. So he was inspired by that to create a two-dimensional table of chemical elements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dr. Kak, how important do you think it is for Indians today, and not just Indians, but people around the world, especially in the scientific community, to know about these contributions and to know about Bharat as a civilization, so to speak? Because although modern India, as we say, got independence in 1947, I think it is again important for people to know that this is a thousands of years old civilization, and perhaps the longest surviving urban civilization of the world from really ancient times. So if you could expand on that.
It's very important. Well, first of all, for the whole world to know history of the world. We are all together now. It's a global village to know what the history is. But now, especially for Indians, why? India is going to play an increasingly more powerful and significant role in world affairs. India already, according to purchasing power parity basis, is the third largest economy in the world. China is one, US is two, India is third. Now, economists believe that in the next 10 years, India will push US to the third place and it'll be second. In another 25 years, it'll be number one. So if India is going to be the largest economy, with power and size comes responsibility. And for responsibility, you have to have self-confidence. You can't just keep on imitating others. We have managed to do that for some time because India didn't really matter very much in world affairs, for geostrategic reasons and so on. But as that changes, India will be in a position to influence world affairs in a fundamental way. And India, with its humanistic and universal civilization, in the Indian scheme of things, every human being has the same Atman, no matter which race or community they come from. So everybody is equal. In fact, we go even further than that and say that even animals have Atman, right? And so that is embracing of the larger ecosystem of life that we have. And that's a wonderful thing because, as you know, right now, there's a lot of cruelty that is meted out to animals. The animal farms in the US, for example, they're terrible. The way they are raised, they can't even move. They are given steroids and then they're just fattened up and then slaughtered. I think the time has come that not only should we treat other human beings with compassion, we should also treat animals with compassion. And I think India can show the way. And of course, the Jains have been at the forefront at that, at treating animals with compassion. So all of this, and not just eating meat, etc. That's really up to every individual what they eat. And the Indian civilization accepts diversity and accepts the agency of every individual to take their decision, but it also has a place for the inner world. So what India has to offer, certainly celebrate life. In the Indian tradition, you have 4 purusharthas, 4 aims of life, and they are dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Artha and kama is ambition and desire, fulfillment, do whatever you want, and live life to the fullest. But within the rails or constraints, if life is a river, in between the banks of dharma, which is morality and ethics, and moksha, which is renunciation, which is to recognize that everybody is the same. Now, Western capitalism doesn't offer these rails of wisdom. If you have untrammeled pursuit of sensory pleasures, at some point it all starts to pall. It starts to have no meaning at all. And I think that's one of the big problems that the world is facing. But irrespective of that, the growth of India cannot be stopped. Until 1,000 years ago, India's share of the world economy was 45%. It was the preeminent economic power for centuries and centuries. And it's re-obtaining that position very soon. It's at the 3rd position, as I mentioned, but very soon, in the next 20, 30 years, it'll be once again in the 1st position. And so we do need the confidence to be connected back to our civilizational ethos, if you will. And then with that confidence, we would be providing wisdom to people elsewhere. Let's not get into wars. Let's see how you can have peace. Let all people have an opportunity to live life to the fullest in every land of the world.
Yeah, and I think one of the greatest strengths of Indian civilization has been to base forward movement on logic and reason, and combine both science and spirituality. I mean, there has never been a conflict in those two in our civilization, as one may have seen in other civilizations of the world at some places. So I think that's also a very important factor, because sometimes the debate gets lost into whether it's this or that, but I think it's both for Indian civilization. I think science and spirituality have gone hand in hand here.
Absolutely. Indian civilization is entirely scientific. Even the Vedas say that everything in the physical universe unfolds according to Rit. Rit means natural law. So there is law everywhere, and there's law also in the operation of our own lives, and which is why we speak of the law of karma, for example. What we do is learned behavior, scripts. So we do whatever is done to us. We're always reacting. But what extraordinarily, what the Indian tradition says is that it is possible to become one with the single consciousness that exists. Atma is one, minds are many, bodies are many, but Atma is one. And the moment you recognize that Atma within you, that sort of transforms you and you become free. It all hangs together. It's truly beautiful.
Dr. Kak, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm sure we are going to interview you many more times to come in the future. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Pallavi.